Broadcasting live from atop the Rocky Mountains, the crossroads of the West. You are listening to the Liberty Roundtable Radio Talk Show.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, happy to have you along. I'm Sam Bushman. Kurt Crosby's with me. Hard-hitting talk radio, always at your fingertips. This is the broadcast for October the 23rd in the year of our Lord 2018. This is hour 2 of 2, and our goal always to protect life, liberty, and property, and to promote God, family, and country on your radio and the traditions of our founding fathers. We reject revolution, stand for peaceful restoration of the greatest country on the face of the earth. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we want to talk this hour about former Congressman Steve Stockman. Many of you may not know who Steve is. Many of you certainly do. He's from the 36th District of Texas. He was in office January 3rd, 2013. To January 3rd, 2015. And he was a wonderful gentleman. And I got to know Steve from having him on the radio a little bit. I got to know Steve from an event we did where we asked him to come and speak. And I wouldn't say that I knew Steve as well as many, but I knew him better than most, that's for sure. And what I saw, I liked. My interactions were stellar. His dedication to the sacred cause of liberty was evaluated and on display, as every congressman and senators are. And I'm telling you right now, Steve Stockman was a constitutional family man. And you know what? Those are the kind of people we want to elect. No wonder the swamp literally hated him. No wonder the swamp got rid of him. And then it just went downhill from there. We'll talk about it. Kurt Crosby's with me. Welcome, sir.
Buenos dias. Greetings and salutations. Howdy, howdy, howdy. Thank you, Sam.
Do you have any quick memories or thoughts of Steve before we talk to his wife?
Well, you brought up most of them as far as I can remember. And every time I've seen any of the stories about him, it's basically, he was standing up for what's right, and the Obamas and crew were going after him big time.
The swamp went after Steve Stockman. He's now in jail. They claim a jury of his peers, caught him in a big old financial scandal. And I submit to you that you're not being told the truth by the mainstream press at all. So Steve Stockman's wife has been working diligently since Steve got put in jail to tell the truth and to focus on this. How we got wind of it is we saw some news articles about it. We've been working at thefreedomcoalition.com for a long time trying to help political prisoners, innocents in prison. There is no liberty with innocents in prison has been our slogan for several years now. But she put together a website called defendapatriot.com. Write that down because that's where you can get more information on this story than anywhere else. Defendapatriot.com. With that introduction, Patti, Steve's wife, welcome to Liberty Roundtable Live.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Kurt.
Do you think our introduction makes sense? Is that a good summary?
It sounds like the Steve Stockman I know and love.
All right. Well, why don't you rewind a little bit, maybe even a little bit before Congress. Steve was just an average guy, right?
Well, he was. Steve has quite a colorful life growing up and as a young man, and but his dad took him walking when he was 8 years old, walking door to door for Barry Goldwater. So he had the desire to make a difference in our nation running in his blood from that early age. Anyway, so Steve and I were married back in 1988. He was then chairman of the Young Conservatives of Texas and completing his degree. He was a late going back to college student and working 3 jobs. When we first decided to run for Congress, in 1989, right after we had gotten married, is when we first decided he should run for Congress because no one, Democrat or Republican, had bothered to challenge our congressman, who was Democrat Congressman Jack Brooks at the time. So through a whole set of circumstances that clearly God orchestrated, he ran in 1990 and again in 92, we held Brooks to the lowest percentage of votes he had ever gotten at that point in 40 years. And so we took that as confirmation from God that we were on the right path, and we just never stopped running. In 1994, we defeated 42-year incumbent Democrat chairman of the Judiciary Committee, who had, by the way, crucified Ollie North in their hearings. So Steve served in Congress a term then in the mid-'90s. He was a pain to the Clintons who were in office. He sat on one of the House committees that was a Whitewater committee investigating the Clinton wrongdoings at that point in time. And because he defeated this powerful Democrat, it put a target on his back for removal from office, and they barely defeated him in 96. And that's a whole set of unique circumstances as well that we don't have time to go into. But he, both that term and when he returned to Congress in 2013, he was huge. He was known to be a huge champion of the Second Amendment, kind of Mr. Gunn. And he challenged the Obama administration and exposed so much of their corruption during the last term he was in office. He did everything in a major, big, public kind of way, such that he was cited on Drudge Report more than all the other House members combined during that last term he was in office.
There you have it. It's an interesting story all the way through, from Steve's life, standing as a constitutional conservative from the beginning, doing his very best to move the needle for the sacred cause of liberty. He went to the swamp, and the swamp is trying to drown him, ladies and gentlemen. But there are compelling factors pointing to this being kind of here's how the swamp does it. You differ in opinion, and they will basically try to criminalize the political differences. They will attack you. They will shut you down to the best of their ability. Now, Hillary walks around free, even though Donald said he was going to lock her up. But Steve Stockman is locked up, to make the point. Let's talk about a few of these factors that relate to it. First off, the FBI. Whenever you see them involved, you know there's got to be shenanigans, right?
That's right.
So, but the FBI began an investigation into Steve, right?
Well, yes, but let me just hit several of the high points of things that Steve did. I told him when this whole thing first began, I said, well, I guess if you poke your finger in the eye of the Obama administration often enough, there will be retribution. He had threatened 2 weeks after taking office, he had threatened the possibility of considering articles of impeachment if the president overstepped his authority by issuing executive orders to limit the Second Amendment. 2 weeks after that, a month into office, he invited Ted Nugent as his guest to the State of the Union address to make a point of how much he supports the Second Amendment. And that was at the time shortly after Sandy Hook elementary shootings, when Obama and all of the Democrats were making such a grand stand for gun control. So Steve tried to counter that, which he successfully did. The press was all over Ted Nugent the whole entire day of the State of the Union. And Steve blocked from even coming to the House at all 2 Senate bills, one on amnesty and one on gun control, by using a little-known tactic that hadn't been used in decades called blue slipping. He exposed Obama's ransom to the Al-Qaeda terrorists for Trader Bo Bergdahl, and he exposed Hillary's violation of the Iran sanctions by allowing sale by one of the Clinton Foundation's biggest donors of steel to Iran, but not just any steel used in nuclear weaponry. And then I think the straw that finally broke the camel's back was Steve filed a House bill to calling for the arrest of Lois Lerner for her contempt of Congress. You'll recall she had refused to appear before Congress. They refused to produce her emails, et cetera. So he had about enough of it and said, look, we have no teeth if we don't do something. Look back in history and saw that Congress had a history of arresting people who stood in contempt of them. So he did that. 2 weeks later, the FBI were at his apartment door, knock, 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 which he did not open, by the way. He was smart enough not to ever talk to them.
And the sad part about this, ladies and gentlemen, is the timing of everything. So what Steve was doing in Congress at the same time, these other shenanigans went down. So the FBI began their investigation of Steve Stockman, coincidentally, the same month that Steve filed a House resolution to arrest Lois Lerner for not only contempt of Congress, but for her wrongdoings, literally backing the attack of conservative patriots based on this political divide. That's what we're talking about when we say they criminalize differences of viewpoint here. And the IRS nonprofit division was partnered with the FBI and the DOJ in this case, right?
That's exactly right. So over a 3-year investigation of Steve began. They dogged him, and we've seen their records, and they followed him around in the Washington, D.C. area. They tailed him down here in Texas. He was on the Foreign Affairs Committee, so while he was in Congress, they were aware of where all he went with the in foreign visits. But after he was out of Congress, because he has really such a passion for international affairs, he continued traveling significantly internationally, and they were tracking everywhere he went, and we believe
So Dennis Rodman can go to North Korea, no problem.
That's right.
Right. You got Kanye West and his lovely wife there made her fame on sex tapes. They can go anywhere they want, but Steve, oh no. Steve Stockman's wife, Patti, is with us, ladies and gentlemen. DefendAPatriot.com. We'll chat in seconds.
How do you know your child loves you?
When he calls and he says, Dad, why don't we go fishing? Just very simple, but it really counts.
They make a song up and they come into our bedroom and say, we made a song and will you listen to it?
Our next oldest daughter came to me with tears in her eyes and she said, Daddy, I just thank you for coming home every night when we were growing
My
up.
son does the nicest things. When he's playing outside, he'll come in and just give me a hug and run right back outside.
My daughter goes to the same high school that I'm the registrar at, and I'll go into my office after the bell has rung, and there's a note on my desk. And it'll usually say, Mom, I love you. I'm thinking about you.
And I think of my boy that we finally got him through graduation. And he came up to me and said, I made it. Thanks.
Family. Isn't it about time?
That's all he said. And that meant everything to me.
From the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Can a nation conceived in liberty carry its head high if it denies protection to the youngest and most vulnerable of its citizens? Can a country founded on God-given rights continue to thrive without understanding that life is a precious gift from our Creator? As a physician, I have looked into the eyes of 1-pound babies. I have cradled their small bodies in the palm of one hand. I defy those who are careless, who would disregard life and look at these tiny little miracles and say, we're not going to protect that.
But I believe there will come a time when we are all judged on whether or not we took a stand in defense of all life from the moment of conception until our last natural breath. One thing I promise you, I will always take a stand for life.
I appreciate that Rand Paul's always willing to stand for life, but I wish he'd stand for the innocent in prison. We have no liberty with innocents in prison. Steve Stockman's wife, Patti Stockman, with us. We're talking about the attack on Steve Stockman. I personally believe it was absolutely belligerently politically motivated. Now, others won't tell you that, but I will because I'm a talk show host, and I have the right to my own opinion. I've studied this thing, and I'm telling you right now, the FBI begins an investigation of former Congressman Steve Stockman while he was Congressman. The same month, Steve filed a House resolution against Lois Lerner for contempt of Congress, also for her abuses towards conservatives. That was a big old story that went nowhere. Nobody got put in jail. Nobody was accountable. Tragic but true. And the IRS nonprofit arm division is partnering with the Department of Justice and the FBI in this case. Now, folks, let's be clear about this. This is the same stuff that happened to Ammon Bundy and crew. The government knew the truth, and they're following the same pattern for Steve Stockman that they followed against Ammon Bundy. They said, hey, this guy's a threat. So they had the FBI, the Justice Department, all these people kind of gang up. Then they said, oh, whoa, Ammon Bundy's a flight risk. And they pitched that to the media for months, while Ammon Bundy rotted in jail. And then it turns out the FBI had documents saying that they had investigated, and they knew Ammon Bundy was not a flight risk. Now they're trying to say Steve Stockman, because he had international involvement in travels, partly as a congressman, partly as a businessman, etc. They say that he's a flight risk. Again, they lie, and they know better. He's got a wife here. He's been in America and Texas basically his whole life. But this agenda continues. And I guess this signatory on indictment piece is very telling too, Patti.
Well, that's true. The indictment didn't come until fully 3 years into the investigation, but one of the signatories on the indictment is one of the same people that Lois Lerner had CC'd on at least one of her emails that we've seen that was released by Judicial Watch, when she was emailing the Department of Justice to engage them in this in the plot that they had to go after conservative groups, Tea Parties, and other conservatives.
So let me get this right. So he investigates Lois Lerner, and he says, hey, you know what? We got to have a House resolution against this. We got to stand up against the IRS abuses of Lois Lerner and others. She got caught with her hand of the cookie jar. Let's hold her accountable. And the same time, they attack Steve. And you get the IRS, you get the FBI, you get the Justice Department, and now in indictments, you find the same IRS-involved bureaucrat copied on an email.
No.
A
DOJ official copied on an email from Lois Lerner, who was at the IRS.
Right, so the IRS, but it proves collusion between the IRS and the DOJ, right?
Well, that email certainly did.
And that email then literally not only does this, but it also attacks not only Steve, but it attacks these conservative groups with arranged meetings to attack them, right?
Well, the email wasn't specific to Steve. What's unique is, these were a series of emails that Judicial Watch obtained and released, showing the collusion between the IRS and DOJ when they went after the conservative group.
Now, let me stop you there, though. So you're saying that we don't have evidence this directly relates to Steve. However, if they're going after conservative groups, how do we know that it doesn't?
Well, that question definitely is on the table.
And it's a fair question to research and find out, and should be brought up in the proceedings.
Well, and another interesting thing is that this all started, of course, during Steve's last year in Congress, and so they were calling in and interviewing a number of people on his staff, not everybody, but a number of people. And one of the guys that they called in and interviewed, and sometimes they would talk to Steve's attorney after they had been interviewed, or to Steve, but largely to his attorney. And one of the guys that was interviewed, he's an attorney himself, and he reported out afterwards that they had said to him, Lois Lerner was a colleague of ours, because she had gone from the IRS by the time Steve filed that bill, and so they made that comment. But that former employee completely denied having said that after the fact. But I was back here in Houston, and I remember Steve telling me about it in amazement that they had said that to him. But it's not on the record anywhere, and that former employee completely denied it sometime afterwards.
All right, so let me articulate this and make this more clear. So a email was sent out by Lerner to the DOJ, and there was a person copied on that email. So this IRS and DOJ internal stuff, that one of the same people that was CC'd into that email was a signator on the indictment for Steve, right?
Yes. And, of course, those emails didn't come out until...
yeah, but I got a question. What does the IRS or the DOJ, what do they have to do with it?
What does the IRS have? Well, exactly.
I'm just wondering how this person's looped into everything, and what you've got is the swamp protecting their own here.
Well, this was a DOJ official, again, who signed the indictment, a DOJ official who had been CC'd by Lerner back when she was dialoguing with DOJ about going after conservatives.
And that's what I'm saying is that, hey, we say there's no link for sure, and this isn't about Steve, but I'm saying with that same person, what else happened behind the scenes? Let's get these people on the stand under oath and say, hey, you know what? This email proves earlier collusion. We know that in the past, Lois Lerner was attacking conservative groups. We know Steve literally tried to create accountability on that. And now this same signator ends up on the indictment, but there's nothing here. Move along.
Right. And unfortunately, because those weren't produced and haven't been produced, they can't be used now at this stage of Steve's game. But let me just tell you and your listeners too, during that 3-year investigation period, we were feeling like we live in the Soviet Union or Cuba or something like that, because again, after Steve left office in January 2015, he continued traveling. He's a big proponent of new technologies, and so when he was in Congress, he had been very supportive of things like 3D printing and cryptocurrency. He fought regulatory burdens on cryptocurrency because he said, every industry deserves the ability to get on its feet and establish itself. And so he became much in demand in the crypto community, and he traveled a lot, speaking to groups about cryptocurrency and the fact that they ought not be regulated. He has a big interest. He had served on the subcommittee for Africa, Eurasia, and emerging threats, so he was often in the Middle East. And he developed some very good relations with folks over in Middle Eastern countries who really like America. In the leadership, they really like America, but they could not understand some of our policies. And
boy, howdy, do I get that.
And Steve would say, no, it's not America, it's the president. This will pass. This will pass. Hang in there with us. And so he he did a lot of mending fences with offended former allies or offended allies, and was seeking to engage in some business relationships so that he could earn enough money to cover the legal expenses we had. But anyway, so the point is he was traveling extensively, and twice, or at least twice that I know of, when he came back into the country, he was detained by TSA. One time they pulled him aside. Mr. Stockman, you're going to have to come with us. So they took him into a little room aside. They took everything that he was carrying. They went through it piece by piece, dividing it into 2 stacks. This is after they made a phone call. They made a phone call first, and after the phone call, they came back and did this with his possessions, and they took one of the stacks and made copies of everything, and they just stacked it all up and pushed it to him for him to figure out how to put away after they had disorganized everything. And I was just stunned when I heard that. I thought, oh my gosh, this has got to be China. Or I guess China would have just immediately thrown him into prison. But I have to tell you that for, 3 years, and whenever he would travel, I was concerned that he would be thrown in prison, either coming or going.
Some of this is over money, ladies and gentlemen. Much of this is over control and power. And when you take on the swamp, be prepared, because the swamp's murky and it's deep. Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking to Patti Stockman, Steve Stockman's wife. To learn more, defendapatriot.com, and spread this interview far and wide, would you please? Back in seconds with Patti Stockman.
Your daily Liberty News Wire. You're listening to Liberty News Radio.
As a parent, is receiving a faith-based, character-focused education for your children difficult to find? Do you believe that godly principles should be a central component in your child's education? Imagine a school where faith and integrity are at its center, where heritage and responsibility instill character. For over 40 years, American Heritage School has been educating both hearts and minds, bringing out academic excellence. This is the school where character and embracing the providence of a living God are fundamental, where students' national test scores average near the 90th percentile. With American Heritage School's advanced distance education program, distance is no longer an issue. With an accredited LDS-oriented curriculum from kindergarten through 12th grade, your children can attend from anywhere in the world. American Heritage School will prepare your child for more than a job. It will prepare them for life. To learn more, visit american-heritage.org. That's american-heritage.org.
Liberty is not free. Its costs are innumerable. Without monetary funding, the valiant efforts of freedom-loving Americans become diminished or outright defeated. We present a solution, the Give Me Liberty Fund. The plan is quite simple. Invite individual Americans to contribute less than $1 a day. These monetary funds are used to promote liberty-minded media, organizations, events, candidates, movements, and speakers. In the spirit of transparency, all expenditures are published. Patriotic business owners provide discounted products and services to Give Me Liberty Fund members. Our greatest strength is in numbers. Go to GiveMeLibertyFund.com and become part of the solution today. GiveMeLibertyFund.com. Participate in the peaceful restoration of the greatest and freest country in the world.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I ask you, what is the KQ? You know, the kosher question. Most Americans will spend their entire lifetime purchasing food from the supermarkets while having no idea that almost every packaged food product on the grocery shelves is certified kosher. Indeed, the kosher question encompasses not only food and religion, but also affects our economics, politics, and our identity. In an effort to promote awareness to the kosher question, developers have published an app for your smartphone that features a database of food products that have not been kosher certified. The Koshertified app has prominent advertisement on TPC's homepage, or you can check out its website at thekosherquestion.com. With the cesspool of politics getting even deeper these days, why not leave the swamp and start eating in favor of your own interests? Check out thekosherquestion.com today and download the app.
Promoting God, family, and country. You are listening to Liberty Roundtable Radio.
All right, we're live, ladies and gentlemen. Sam Bushman and Kurt Crosby breaking it down just for you like no other. Long-form talk radio gets to the real heart of the story. We're talking to Patti Stockman, Steve Stockman's wife. And we're talking about the fact that Steve didn't really get a fair trial. They say he got a jury of his peers, but it's not exactly accurate because the jury didn't get Steve's side of the story. They literally painted Steve as a flight risk. Can't even get out on bail kind of stuff. They literally had the IRS, the FBI, the Justice Department all in bed as swamp monsters attacking former Congressman Steve Stockman. And so the judge denies all Stockman's witnesses, but two saying their testimony, well, would be irrelevant. Even though they refuted much of the character assassination witnesses the government trotted out, right? Character assaults from prosecution witnesses were abundant, but in defense of Steve and his character, not even in the mix. What's up with that? And so we need fully informed juries, ladies and gentlemen. We need honest, open, transparent, speedy trials. We need a jury of peers, there's no doubt about it, but the jury of peers need to have, as far as I can tell, due process of law put before them, not a manipulated case that, you know what, no one will ever see daylight. And that's kind of really what we're seeing here as I look behind the scenes and research this thing. That's what we're seeing happen to Steve They're violating due process. They're violating a speedy trial. They investigated him forever. And let's talk about the jury. They say, hey, a jury of his peers convicted him. Well, which jury of peers are we talking about, Patti?
Well, it probably is a jury of his peers, though I don't think it had very many conservatives on it. But
was there any congressmen on it?
No.
Okay, because there should be if we're gonna really, because the life of a congressman oftentimes isn't the life of the average Joe.
Well, that's true. But even given this jury would have undoubtedly come back with a verdict that was correct if they had heard Steve's side of the story. But unfortunately, we're not wealthy people, never ever have been. I remember my dad back in the 90s, he never got to see Steve elected because he died during those 6 years that we were continuing to run for office. But he told me, Patti, you can't be elected unless you're wealthy. And so I was sorry he didn't live to see that. But we were grassroots, just normal middle class track home owners anyway. And that's the way these jurors were as well. But it's just amazing that the system is rigged. I mean, the Justice Department didn't, they followed all of the rules that are in place, and they were allowed to forbid the mention of Lois Lerner's name, and forbidden to bring up anything political at all. It was all had to focus on just what Steve was accused of, not the context within which he was accused. And
there's no freedom of speech in court, right?
Exactly. It was like a straitjacket. Steve said numerous times during the trial, I feel like I'm at a trial of chefs and you can't mention food.
It's a great point.
Crazy. It was crazy.
Wow.
But I have to say, during those 3 years of investigation, they convened, your audience should know, during those 3 years, they took their evidence, whatever their evidence was, and witnesses from all over the country, Steve's family members and former volunteers in the campaign and former staffers and even a mechanic who had worked on his brother's car years earlier that Steve had paid for, drugged them before three grand juries. So let
me stop you there then. When we talk about a jury of peers, Steve had what, 3 of them?
Well, grand juries are, most Americans, I'm sure, are like me, have not really a clue about grand juries. I suppose they're the peers, but the defendant doesn't even know about it. The only reason we knew about them was...
Yeah, in other words, you don't get to face your accuser.
That's right.
You get a jury of, very unique, hand-picked people that I guess the attorney can be involved in to some degree, but you can't even attend this thing. You literally have these allegations against you, and you don't have a chance to defend yourself at all until after the jury deliberates. And then supposedly, hey, after you get barbecued, then you can come out, and then maybe we might have this fight where you got your arms tied behind your back. We've seen this all before.
That's right. And the defense attorney has no input into the selection of the jurors for grand juries. I mean, no input. The defense attorney, I can't remember if Steve's defense attorney was informed that a grand jury was happening or if he only knew because the people who were drugged before the grand juries.
No, I think he has to be told there's a grand jury, but wait on the sidelines while we go ahead and get the convictions, and then you can defend yourself from a hole.
Right, and the interesting thing, I think you're right, and another interesting thing about the grand juries that I learned in reading the transcripts that came out of them is that the witnesses they call cannot have their own attorneys in the grand jury proceeding. They have to wait outside in a hallway or wherever they wait, and if the witness feels like anywhere along the way, if they feel like, I need to talk with my attorney, they can call a pause and go talk to their attorney about their perspective of what's happening. It's crazy, just crazy. And there's no judge that presides, no one no impartial.
Steve doesn't get to go. Steve's attorney doesn't get to go. You just get to read the abuse after the fact. This is what I mean by a due process of law. That is not due process. You should be considered innocent until proven guilty. You should have the right to face your accuser. In other words, we need to have a speedy, open trial. But what they do is they circumvent the trial, and they literally convict you, and then you basically try to defend yourself after the fact by digging yourself out of a hole. I'm telling you, that's how it happens, ladies and gentlemen. And so the judge denies all Stockman witnesses even later. So this is after these, quote, indictments and things like that. But I submit that he never even got a jury of peers, though, because they had to go through multiple juries to get a conviction. If you go on a witch hunt long enough, hey, you'll eventually convict on anybody. Because all you got to do is...
Like in one of these stories about him, townhall.com has this piece, and it says, talks about, what's the guy named, Joseph Gotti, I think, a pretty famous criminal, and he basically said, hey, you show me the man, I'll show you it was Joseph Stalin, head of the secret police. He said, show me the man and I'll show you the crime. So in other words, you can always trump up some crime for anybody.
Well, and especially so he had multiple juries, and I submit that's double jeopardy right there. So the other juries, what? They didn't get a conviction, so they just kept it going, right?
Exactly. And I recall after the first grand jury ended, the first grand jury was in D.C., the second grand jury was in, I think, Baltimore, and then there was another grand jury in Houston, and then a fourth grand jury, at least in Houston. And the way we know that they were different grand juries is because one of Steve's friends and former associates was called before both of them, and he reported out later that they were different juries. So yes, they just kept going. It's like someone gets pulled over by a traffic cop and accused of running a red light when it was very clearly green when you went through it, and so they take you to court, and the judge says, no, this person isn't guilty for whatever reason. So he goes to another court to try to get his case proven. Yes, they did run a red light, and go to 3, and they can't get a conviction of you because you ran a red light. And so they go to the 4th, and finally they say, okay, this person's guilty of running the red light. It's just nuts.
Well, that's what you have, and that's why I talk about a speedy trial. I talk about due process of law. I talk about fully informed juries, okay, because all these things are relevant here. They took forever on Steve. It was a witch hunt. They couldn't get it. But if you pursue long enough, and if you violate the double jeopardy ideas, now they have all technicalities why they claim, oh, it wasn't really double jeopardy because we never really had a trial at that case yet. And well, that's what they do, though, is they do all these things to proceed a trial to where, hey, they can basically get their convictions before it ever goes to trial. That way they're assured their convictions. That's what happened. Now, in Ammon Bundy's case, he had a whistleblower come to the table and out the FBI, and so the truth started to come out. Sad tale to tell, Steve Stockman, at least so far, hasn't been given that reality check. And so it's a very difficult circumstance, ladies and gentlemen. Steve is in jail. The good news is his spirits are up. Patti just came back, and we'll hear from Patti about how Steve's doing and what he's hoping for. We'll tell you the appeal's going to happen. Sentencing's going to happen. Patti will break it all down for you in seconds. You are listening to the one and only Liberty Roundtable Live.
Attention Liberty News Radio listeners. Hard-hitting talk radio has never been and never will be supported by the mainstream in America. Hard-hitting talk radio is taking on the mainstream press like never before. News the networks refuse to use is one of the best ways to educate people. We invite all liberty-loving Americans to join with us to restore the principles of our founding fathers and promote God, family, and country in the media and our lives. Please help spread the Liberty message with your generous donation. You can go online at libertynewsradio.com right now and make a donation online. Or call 801-756-9133 and make a donation over the phone. That's libertynewsradio.com and 801-756-9133. Make a donation today.
Scott Bradley here. Most Americans are painfully aware that the nation is on the wrong track and in dire straits. Unfortunately, most political pundits only nibble around the edges when they claim to address the issues. Even worse, many of the so-called solutions are simply rewarmed servings of what got us into the mess we currently face. And the politicians think we're so gullible and naive that we'll buy their lies that they have reformed and now understand where they led us astray. Unfortunately, the truth of the matter is that they simply wish to continue to hold power. The solution to America's challenges is found in returning to the timeless principles found in the United States Constitution. My book and lecture series will reawaken in Americans an understanding and love of the principles which made this nation the freest, most prosperous, happiest, and most respected nation on earth. Visit topreservethenation.com and order my book and lectures to begin the restoration of this great nation.
Begging politicians, bureaucrats, and educrats, and all do-gooders to please obey the supreme law of the land, the Constitution. This is Liberty Roundtable.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, you hear the stories from the dishonest press in bed with the swamp in government about Steve Stockman. They want you to believe that he's evil, that he had a big old financial scam, that it was just out of control, man. The poor guy was just taking advantage of everybody, and thank the heavens the good guys stopped the rogue congressman. That's their story, ladies and gentlemen. They're sticking to it. I submit to you it's a flat-out lie. Now, I'm speaking for myself, not Patti. I'm just telling you that's my opinion. It's bogus. I've been involved in protecting the innocent in prison since, 25 years ago in the George Hansen days. We used to interview former Congressman George Hansen of Idaho and talk about how he took on the IRS, and they literally abused him for years. We had him on the radio back in those days. We've been at this for a long time, ladies and gentlemen. We've probably covered more cases on this on the radio than anybody. I digress, though. Patti Stockman with us, Steve Stockman's wife, and the FBI began an investigation the same month. Steve filed a House resolution saying, you know what, Lois Lerner should not be able to attack conservatives, and we got to really get to the bottom of this. She's in contempt of Congress, and we got to do something about it. Well, Steve Stockman's now in jail, and Steve Stockman's defending himself, and it took multiple juries on a witch hunt to get him there. But they're going to have the sentencing coming up. So before we get to the sentencing, though, how is Steve? You just got back from visiting him again, right, Patti?
Yes, he's hanging in there, Sam, by the grace of God. He's got some health issues. He's diabetic, insulin-dependent diabetic, and diabetes leads to other health issues as well. And he's not getting good health care there at all. He's in a cell with 11 other guys after spending nearly about 2 weeks approximately in solitary confinement where they first put him. But let me just backtrack just a moment and bring your listeners up to speed, because we left it with 3 grand juries. Ultimately, with a 4th grand jury, they were able to get an indictment of Steve. They had arrested him actually the week before on a federal complaint, they called it. It was fairly flimsy, but they arrested him, as I had feared, when he was getting on a plane to fly to Dubai on a business trip. I didn't know about it until the next afternoon, because they didn't allow him a phone call. They said, that's TV, this is reality. So no one who knew Steve, other than those guys, had any idea where he was that night. And then that was March 15th, 2017. And as I was saying, we're not wealthy, so we could not afford the kind of defense, a powerful, aggressive defense attorneys that Steve really needed. And so it's amazing, folks, that even attorneys really don't know what's going on with the corruption in our Justice Department. We couldn't find an attorney who believed about that there was any corruption or that there was any possible political angle to this. So consequently, Steve did not have the kind of defense that he needed. Well, he couldn't have the defense that we should have had. And so he was found, the trial ensued this past spring, a year after he was arrested and indicted. And it was nearly a 3-week trial. While we were waiting for the jury to come back, Steve said on more than one occasion, if I had sat and listened all this time to what the jury heard, I would find me guilty. And so he was anticipating to be found guilty. The Justice Department, the prosecutors had requested, virtually demanded, that he be locked up immediately. So as soon as the verdict came back, the courtroom was cleared. They shackled Steve hand and foot like a murderer or something and took him off to prison. And he's been there now for over 6 months. That was April 12th. He's been in federal prison for over 6 months. The sentencing hasn't even happened. He's been there locked up pending sentencing. We filed a motion to release him pending sentencing. And I don't know if you're familiar with Sidney Powell. You can talk about that if there's time. Sidney Powell, who wrote the book License to Lie about the Justice Department, she signed on to that motion to release him. She's just beside herself with the treatment Steve is getting. And the judge completely denied the motion to keep him in, and is keeping him locked up, so he hasn't been able to prepare for sentencing or appeal. People want to know, are we going to appeal? Yes, we're going to appeal this decision, but we can't even file indication that he that he's going to appeal until he's sentenced, and that's scheduled for November 7th, the day after Election Day. So keep the elections in your prayers, go and vote, but also keep Steve in your prayers as you're thinking and praying about the election. You can remember Steve Stockman. But back to how he is, he's doing fine. I'm so touched, Sam and Kirk, by Steve's heart for others. He's a giving guy, and he's so concerned about some of his cellmates, and many of them are probably very guilty, some probably getting penalties that are far over the top. But I know once they put a communist Chinese young man in the cell with him, these people in the cell with him are young enough to be his sons or grandsons, and he had me have a friend, a Chinese friend, order a Mandarin English Bible that we sent for this guy. He's been since moved out, but not until one of Steve's cellmates got him started on a Bible study. He took his Bible with him. Also recently, he asked me please to add $35 to one of his cellmates' commissary accounts with which he could make phone calls. He's a young husband and 3 children dad, and they were broke. He couldn't afford to call his wife even. So I put $35 on his commissary account. He called his wife, who said, "What did you have to do to get money to be able to call?" And he said, "Nothing, honey. I didn't have to do anything. One of my cellmates had his wife do." And she broke into tears, just weeping because she didn't expect to hear from him because they couldn't afford it. So Steve's heart is still for others, serving others, and I'm really moved by that. Anyway, so that's about Steve. As far as sentencing, again, we will file to appeal. Only about 5% of those who plead not guilty, as Steve did, and go to trial, win at trial. And of those who appeal on federal cases, only roughly 5% of those win on appeal. So we've got a number of activities afoot that hopefully may lead towards asking and receiving a presidential pardon.
All right, we're working on a presidential pardon, big time for Steve. There's a lot behind the scenes. There's people writing letters in defense of Steve. We're putting together a petition. If you go to defendapatriot.com, you can read about it, sign the petition, and more. Before the end of the hour, though, Kurt found 2 stories that I want to highlight. Kurt? Uh-oh, now Kurt's missing.
It's amazing, Sam. Yeah, I was looking through some of the different ones on our website, the defendapatriot.com, and you've got a lot of good information there. One of the most recent ones, Sam, how you mentioned that it looks like there's nothing recently, and yet there's a key FBI witness, according to Town Hall, that is now saying that Representative Steve Stockman is innocent. So there's a lot of stuff going on this, huh, Sam?
Well, so I submit that Donald Trump sits down with me and the good Sheriff Richard Mack and Patti Stockman and get Steve in the room and get this FBI witness in the room and get the reality check on multiple grand juries, literally a witch hunt gone awry. And we literally sit down. Donald has personal experience with this, though, too, because what was his name? Michael Cohen, I guess, had his office raided. And then what's that other guy's name, Patti?
Manafort.
Paul Manafort had his house.
To their home at nighttime, and the couple were in bed in their pajamas, and they frisked them and checked them, and that was the kind of thing I feared for 3 years, even though that had never happened to Manafort at that point. But if folks go to the website and they want to add their names to the petition, they'll need to click the button that says "I want to help," and that's the first option that they'll have. And I have requested that the body of the text of the petition be linked there, and I don't know if it's linked yet, so if it's not, just be patient. We will get it linked, but you can tell us to add your names and your city to the petition, and we'll do that. So I just wanted to mention that.
Amen. So the other story I find interesting, too, there's a lot of us actually working on this. We've got to link arms and stand together, though. Kurt brought up a story I didn't even know happened. What, back in April, Kurt? You got our buddy Joseph Farah.
That's right. Joseph Farah saying basically I want President Trump to pardon Steve Stockman. And Joseph Farah, WorldNet Daily, great guy.
And I know Joseph. So, see, I'd like to get Joseph Farah in the room. I'd like to get us in the room. I'd like to get Richard Mack in the room. I'd like to get, I'll even take Kanye West and Kim Kardashian. We can get Ted Nugent. We could put together a task force to protect innocents in prison via the Donald, because the swamp is just too belligerent and egregious. And we're going to be pushing for that. We'll have Patti back on with us to keep abreast of exactly what's happening. The sentencing is on the 7th, and we'll certainly keep up with you, Patti, on exactly what's happening and what we can do about it. But we need a pardon. What do they say the sentencing will likely be? In other words, what are they going to try to do? Put him in jail forever?
Well, yeah, we believe that they probably will. All of his, quote, crimes add up to 283 years prison time. Of course, he promises not to serve all of that time. But the judge has, we believe this judge will probably sentence him to possibly 20 years. And Steve will be 61 right after this.
Yeah, but if he's a diabetic and they're not taking care of his health properly, though, then that'll significantly shorten his life, because diabetes literally leads to other issues and stuff. And so, you know what, folks, this is serious. Our prayers are with Steve. We'll do everything we can to help see the truth come out on this. We want, like I said, we want a fully informed jury. We want a speedy trial, and we want due process of law. And there needs to be an investigation into all these witch hunt-esque type details that surround this case that the mainstream press will not tell the tale of. There are two sides to every story, and we're here to tell the other side. That's why they hate us. But ladies and gentlemen, this is news the networks refuse to use. This has to get out. And I wish there was more of us, Patti.
Thank you. Yes, we do too. And I think there are more of us. They just aren't aware. Even Steve's former colleagues, who I visited several in July, right before they broke for their August break, and only two who were really closest to Steve were aware, but they weren't fully informed. The others, their mouths dropped open when I told them what had happened, and they were shocked, just shocked. So even members of Congress who were busy making news weren't seeing the news about Steve because it's kind of buried.
So they got this murder going on in the, consulate or whatever, and you got Turkey and Saudi Arabia and everybody involved. Now, that's an important story maybe, but I submit to you that Steve Stockman's story is 10 times more important. We're talking about a congressman with no due process of law. That's the story, ladies and gentlemen. DefendAPatriot.com. Please get involved. Please do everything you can to help. They need financial support. They need people to sign petitions. We need to somehow get a hold of Kanye West and Kim Kardashian or Joe Arpaio. Well, none of these people seem willing to help. I wonder why.
Sam?
Yes.
Sam, they can also text the word fight to 444-999. Text fight to 444-999.
We're flat out of time. Thank you, Patti. We'll have you back soon.
Thank you.
There she goes, ladies and gentlemen. We're doing our best to tell the tale of liberty. This is Liberty Roundtable Live. LibertyRoundtable.com. Donate and get involved today, would you please? Free and on-demand radio, live and on-demand radio at your fingertips. We declare this nation shall endure. God save the Republic of the United States of America.